The millionaire's toast turned to silence when his Barren ex entered the room with twins that weren't supposed to exist. The crystal glasses trembled in his hand as the words he had rehearsed to humiliate her froze on his lips. Cameras clicked, champagne sparkled under the chandeliers, and the entire crowd felt the electricity of the moment before they understood it. He had imagined triumph. Instead, the air hung heavy with disbelief. Jonathan Sterling, at 38, had spent a lifetime crafting perfection. The CEO of Sterling Enterprises moved through life like a man untouched by error or consequence, his sharp suits and sharper smile his armor against the world. Tonight, his sprawling penthouse glistened with wealth, adorned with floral arrangements so extravagant they seemed to mock simplicity itself. He raised his glass, eyes scanning the crowd with a predator's precision, until finally, the center of his attention arrived. Isabel Reed walked in as if she belonged to another world altogether. Soft light seemed to cling to her, casting the modest elegance of her dress in a glow that clashed deliciously with the ostentatious surroundings. She had spent years learning to carry herself with quiet dignity, nurturing the life that had once been deemed impossible. And now, with twins clasping her hands, two small miracles swaddled in innocence, the room collectively inhaled a breath it didn't know it was holding. Jonathan's fiancée, Vanessa, perched on the edge of her seat near the buffet, froze mid-smile. She had never met Isabel, only heard the stories of the woman Jonathan had left behind. Vanessa's face twitched with a mixture of confusion and panic. She had counted on the narrative of shame, the humiliation that would prove Jonathan's judgment right. Instead, the room's attention shifted, and she felt the tides turning beneath her stilettos. Isabel's gaze met Jonathan's, steady and unyielding. She offered no explanation, no apology, nothing but the truth that shimmered in the infant's wide eyes. Jonathan's mind raced. How? Impossible. The twins were real. How could she? He felt a knot of disbelief and humiliation constrict his chest, a feeling he had never before encountered in all his boardroom battles and public triumphs. Meanwhile, Isabel felt a flicker of fear, a whisper of doubt, but it was drowned by a surge of defiance. She had spent years perfecting the art of survival, rebuilding her life after the heartbreak he had inflicted. And now, the moment of reckoning had arrived, not with anger but with dignity. The twins, each clutching her fingers, were her armor and her truth. She allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. She had waited for this day, not to wound, but to show what he had underestimated all along. The guests murmured, voices rising in a soft crescendo of curiosity and shock. Some leaned closer, phones raised, capturing the moment. Jonathan could feel every eye in the room on him, every whisper slicing through his carefully constructed facade. He wanted to speak, to regain control, to redirect the narrative, but the words stuck in his throat, inadequate and trembling. In the quiet chaos of the room, he caught the smallest of movements from the twins, tiny fingers curling around his vision of what life could have been. A pang of something unfamiliar surged in him, regret, longing, and fear intertwined. He hated it. He hated that this feeling had found him in the one arena he thought was untouchable, the control of appearances, the illusion of mastery over every outcome. Across the room, Isabel's mother subtly adjusted the twins' blankets, her eyes sharp, protective. She had known the years of heartbreak her daughter had endured, the nights of silent tears and whispered prayers. And now, she watched with quiet satisfaction as Isabel stepped fully into the light, unbowed, unbroken, and entirely herself. The room had changed its rhythm, and everyone could feel it. Jonathan's toast hung in the air like a suspended knife. He lowered the crystal glass, his fingers trembling just enough to catch Vanessa's attention. She pressed her lips into a forced smile, and in that instant, Jonathan realized he had underestimated the depth of what he had lost, not the woman herself, but the life he had walked away from. The babies, the future, the love he had taken for granted, all tangible reminders of his own arrogance. Isabel didn't need to speak. Her entrance, her calm strength, the gentle sway of the twins, it said everything. The power balance had shifted, and Jonathan felt the first crack in his carefully maintained empire of pride. Questions and whispers floated through the room. Who were these children? How had she done it? The narrative he had counted on to humiliate her had evaporated in an instant, replaced by something far more potent, awe, curiosity, and the sting of his own shame. And in that silence, the first seed of change took root. The man who had once believed he controlled everything was about to learn that some truths, like love, loss, and the quiet power of resilience, cannot be managed, bargained with, or humiliated. They simply exist, and sometimes they arrive when least expected. Have you ever underestimated someone and been proven wrong in the most unexpected way? Comment below if you've experienced a moment that changed everything. The chatter of the baby shower dulled to a hum as Isabel, with the twins gently cradled, made her way through the room. Every step she took drew eyes, whispers, and the sharp intake of breath from those who had come expecting scandal. Jonathan watched, frozen, his ego colliding with reality. The twins' small faces, innocent yet knowing in their unintentional power, were mirrors reflecting his misjudgment, the cruel certainty that had led him to invite her here. He tried to regain composure. Lifting his glass, he forced a smile. "Ah, Isabel." "How unexpected," he said, his voice tight with disbelief. The words barely carried over the gasp that had escaped the crowd. He had rehearsed humiliation, sarcasm, witty remarks, but none of that applied to this truth in front of him. Isabel met his gaze steadily, calm and unshaken. She allowed no tremor of fear, no hint of apology, just a soft, unwavering confidence. "I didn't think I'd miss this opportunity to see you," she said, her voice gentle, almost teasing, yet carrying the weight of years spent rebuilding herself after his rejection. The twins, sensing her calm, reached up instinctively, tiny fingers brushing her cheeks, grounding her in the moment. A ripple of shock ran through the attendees. Cameras clicked, some guests whispered, others simply stared, sensing the raw tension between the two. Jonathan's fiancée, Vanessa, stiffened. Her confidence in the plan to humiliate Isabel faltered. She had expected a defeated woman, fragile and trembling. Instead, Isabel carried herself with grace, and worse, Jonathan was no longer the master of the room. The twins cooed softly, breaking the tension just enough to heighten it. Jonathan's mind raced. They weren't hers, how could she have them? Impossible questions swirled, but each answer only fueled his inner turmoil. He realized with a shocking clarity that he had walked into a moment beyond his control, where status, wealth, and cunning meant nothing. The air seemed charged, electric, as if the room itself were aware of the reversal of power. Isabel set the twins down gently on a plush playmat someone had provided at the edge of the lavish seating area. She smiled down at them, and in that smile was both defiance and serenity, a message Jonathan couldn't ignore. They were her life, her victory, the tangible proof of her resilience. And now, in front of everyone he thought he could manipulate, they were living evidence that he had misjudged, misunderstood, and most of all, underestimated her. Jonathan swallowed hard. He wanted to laugh, to call this coincidence, but no words came. His mind kept returning to the nights he had spent trying to rationalize his cruelty, justifying leaving her, justifying the divorce, the humiliation he had planned for this very evening. And yet here she stood, radiant, with two tiny humans who embodied every success, every love, and every secret triumph he had ignored. The tension thickened. Guests leaned forward, sensing the unsaid, waiting for the verbal clash that Jonathan was expected to deliver. But he remained silent, each passing second gnawing at his pride. Isabel's calm presence forced him to confront feelings he hadn't dared feel in years: regret, admiration, longing, and fear. His carefully built world teetered on the edge of collapse. She spoke again, lightly, almost conversationally. "They're twins. I wanted you to meet them, you know, face to face." The words, simple and controlled, landed like a hammer. Jonathan felt heat rise in his chest, not anger at her, but shame at himself. His ego bristled, but he also felt the unmistakable pang of loss. This was the life he had rejected, and it existed without him, thriving, untouched by his absence. The room held its breath. Someone whispered, "Twins," and the sound seemed to echo, bouncing off crystal chandeliers, gilded walls, and polished floors. Jonathan clenched his fists beneath the tablecloth, trying to steady the shaking of his hands. Every fiber of his being screamed to regain control, to twist the situation to humiliation, but no strategy, no joke, no insult could penetrate the quiet strength of Isabel's moment. He tried finally, a low voice barely audible above the murmurs. I don't understand." But she only smiled softly, the hint of satisfaction in her eyes unmistakable. "There's nothing to understand, Jonathan. This is my life now, and these are my children." A wave of silence followed. Guests looked from her to him, some stifling laughter, some in awe, and others with sympathetic understanding. Jonathan realized that the very thing he had intended to use as a weapon, her barrenness, had been transformed into the ultimate irony. He had thought to humiliate her, but she had already rewritten the narrative, turning humiliation into empowerment. The twins, oblivious to the tension, crawled toward each other, giggling softly. Isabel's hand lingered near Jonathan's, just for a moment, acknowledgement, maybe even forgiveness, but not submission. That tiny gesture, simple yet profound, ignited a flicker of recognition in him. She had survived, thrived, and created love where he had sought to dominate. Jonathan's fiancée fidgeted beside him, her own composure crumbling under the weight of the spectacle. Vanessa's eyes darted between Isabel and Jonathan, the twins, and the guests. Her carefully constructed evening of mockery had become a public spectacle that no wealth or influence could control. She had underestimated the power of truth, of resilience, of genuine love. Jonathan finally exhaled, the toast he had prepared dissolving into the air like smoke. His grip on his glass tightened, and he realized something he had never admitted to himself. The emotional spark that tonight had ignited was bigger than wealth, bigger than ego, and far more complicated than humiliation. He was seeing Isabel not as the woman he had dismissed, but as someone entirely unshakable, radiant, and terrifyingly real. And in that instant, something shifted. The room buzzed with curiosity, judgment, and quiet reverence. The twins, giggling and reaching for her fingers, became symbols not just of triumph but of the emotional reckoning that Jonathan could no longer avoid. His plan had failed spectacularly. The event meant to humiliate had turned into a crucible of truth, a moment where past and present collided with emotional force. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone you underestimated completely surprised you? Share your story in the comments below. The champagne glasses had long since been set aside, forgotten on side tables, as Jonathan retreated into the corner of the room, his mind spinning in tight circles. He could feel the heat of the stares on him, the whispers threading through the guests like sharp needles. Every eye was on him, and every glance reminded him of a truth he had never faced. Isabel had won, simply by existing in the space with her children. He wanted to speak, to rationalize, to cast out, anything to regain control. "These children," he began, faltering. "Are you saying?" His voice cracked, disbelief tangled with fury. Isabel's gaze didn't waver. Her jaw was set, her posture calm. "They're mine," she said simply. "And nothing you say will change that." A shiver ran down his spine. He wanted to shout, to argue, to challenge her, but every word felt shallow against the weight of reality. Pride battled helplessness inside him, each emotion pulling him in opposite directions. He realized, bitterly, that no argument, no clever line, could dismantle the living proof of his mistake. Guests sensed the tension. Some whispered behind their hands, others held their breath. Vanessa's eyes were sharp, accusatory, and panicked. She leaned closer to Jonathan. "Say something," she hissed. "You can't just..." "No," Jonathan interrupted, his voice low and tight. I can't." He ran a hand through his hair, trying to tame the storm inside him. The humiliation he had planned for Isabel had backfired spectacularly, and he had no idea how to reclaim his narrative. Isabel, sensing the fragile control he clung to, didn't press further. She knew the power of silence. Each second that passed allowed the truth to settle, a quiet reckoning that no insults could erase. Yet beneath her calm exterior, a flicker of fear remained. What if he refused to accept it? What if his pride consumed any chance of acknowledgement? The twins, giggling softly on the plush mat, crawled toward Isabel. Their innocence was a stark contrast to the storm swirling around their father, the man who had once been their mother's husband. They were unaware of the tension, oblivious to the history that hung like a cloud over the room. But to Jonathan, they were the embodiment of all he had lost. He tried to divert his thoughts, scanning the room for allies, for something, anything, that might allow him to regain composure. Yet the air itself seemed charged against him. Isabel had not only survived, she had flourished, and the guests, high society onlookers, recognized it. Every whispered comment, every side glance, deepened his sense of helplessness. Jonathan's hands trembled slightly, a rare vulnerability he had carefully hidden for decades. He realized he had spent years controlling outcomes, manipulating perceptions, believing wealth and power could compensate for emotional shortcomings. But here, in the presence of the children and the woman he had once discarded, none of that mattered. The realization hit him like ice: the past could not be rewritten. Humiliation, regret, longing, they were all alive, unstoppable, and utterly his to face. Isabel, on the other hand, faced her own resistance. She had come expecting confrontation, but she hadn't anticipated the rush of old emotions, the surge of unresolved pain that flooded her chest seeing Jonathan's reaction. Part of her wanted to retreat, to leave, and reclaim the safety she had built for herself and the twins. Yet another part, the part that had longed for justice, for acknowledgement, urged her to stay, to assert her truth in its fullest, undeniable form. Vanessa, sensing her position slipping, tried to intervene. "Jonathan, don't let her," she began, but he raised a hand, silencing her. He needed to process this alone, to face the storm that had arrived uninvited into his carefully curated life. The minutes stretched, heavy with unspoken words. The twins tugged gently at Isabel's fingers, grounding her, reminding her that while the past hurt, the present demanded focus and clarity. Jonathan's eyes followed them, a mixture of awe and torment churning inside him. Every gesture, every smile, every tiny sound of laughter became an echo of the life he had once walked away from, a life built without consideration for love, only control. Finally, he spoke, voice raw. "I don't know what to say." The admission, though brief, was seismic. It revealed vulnerability he had long buried, an acknowledgement that control, power, and wealth could not shield him from the consequences of his arrogance. Isabel nodded, her expression softening, yet firm. "Then say nothing. Let the truth speak for itself." And it did. The room's energy shifted subtly, no longer anticipating a battle of words, but observing the quiet clash of emotions, pride, regret, dignity, and the raw, undeniable strength of love and resilience. The twins, innocent yet powerful in their presence, reminded Jonathan of the reality he could not deny. The past was gone, but the consequences were alive, demanding recognition, reflection, and eventual reconciliation. Have you ever been in a situation where saying nothing felt more powerful than any argument? Comment below with a moment you held your silence, and what it revealed. The murmurs in the penthouse slowly died down as the baby shower wound toward its lavish conclusion, but Jonathan didn't move. Isabel, too, remained near the twins, her posture calm but resolute. Neither could leave, there was too much left unsaid, too much tension suspended between them. The twins began to fuss, tired from the overstimulation of the crowd. Isabel scooped them into her arms, glancing around for a quiet corner. Jonathan, compelled despite himself, followed. They ended up in the study adjoining the grand hall, a room of dark wood and muted lighting, a stark contrast to the glimmering chaos outside. The door closed behind them, creating an unspoken bubble of tension. The distant chatter was muffled, all that existed was the two of them, the twins' gentle breathing, and the invisible weight of years of unresolved pain. Jonathan cleared his throat, but words failed him. Isabel placed the twins on a nearby chair, their small hands exploring a basket of plush toys. "I didn't come to fight, Jonathan," she said softly, yet firmly. "I came to show you the truth." "The truth," he repeated, voice tight, "is that I thought I controlled everything. I wanted to humiliate you tonight. I didn't expect this." His eyes flicked to the twins, then back to her. The sting of humility was raw, almost unbearable. Isabel's gaze softened. "You wanted revenge, but I brought reality. These are my children. My life. My happiness." Her voice wavered ever so slightly, betraying the emotional cost of returning to face him. Jonathan ran a hand through his hair, pacing the small study. I don't know what to say. I feel everything and nothing at the same time. Anger, disbelief, regret, and something else I can't name. Fear? Isabel asked quietly, reading the flicker in his eyes. Fear of what you lost? Or fear of realizing you can't control me or them? He stopped, staring at her. Both, he admitted, the words catching in his throat. He wanted to assert dominance, to regain composure, but every instinct he had relied on for decades failed him here. Isabel stepped closer, the twins cradled in her arms. I won't let you hurt us, or me, again. But if you want a chance to make this right, it starts with humility. Not arrogance. Not charm. Humility. Jonathan's chest tightened. Humility was foreign territory. He had spent a lifetime believing that wealth, power, and charm could solve every problem. Now, in this quiet room, he was stripped bare, confronted with a woman whose dignity had survived his cruelty and children who embodied his failure. The twins, sensing the tension, reached toward Jonathan instinctively. He froze for a moment, heart hammering. Their innocence, their open trust, bypassed his defenses and pierced straight to the part of him he had long buried, longing, love, and regret. He knelt slowly, holding out a hand. Tentatively, almost hesitantly, the twins reached for him, and he allowed himself a small, trembling smile. Isabel's lips curved in the faintest acknowledgement, a nod to the first step toward reconciliation. Not victory, not surrender, just recognition that a bridge might be possible, if he truly wanted it. They stood there, a fragile balance of past pain and present possibilities. Neither spoke much. The weight of history filled the space with a quiet intensity. For the first time in years, Jonathan realized that proximity didn't always mean control. Sometimes, it meant confrontation with the truth, and sometimes, the truth demanded transformation. A sudden sound from the main hall, a guest calling for Jonathan, pulled them back momentarily. Isabel's eyes met his. I'm not leaving until we talk. Not really. You can't hide from this moment, Jonathan. Not tonight. He nodded, swallowing hard. I know. I'm not going anywhere. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a man beginning to confront the consequences of decades of pride, mistakes, and emotional denial. For a few minutes, they simply existed in that forced proximity. The twins' soft breathing, the muted hum of the city beyond the penthouse windows, and the quiet understanding that something fundamental had shifted between them filled the room. Both felt the first stirrings of an emotional bond that had been dormant, ignored, and denied, but was now impossible to dismiss. Jonathan finally exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. I've underestimated you, in every way, he admitted, voice low and unguarded. Not just tonight. Not just the twins. Everything. Isabel's eyes softened. Then start listening, not planning your next move. Start understanding, not controlling. That's how this begins. For the first time in years, they were on equal footing. No pride, no arrogance, just raw, human connection stretching across years of pain and disappointment. The room, quiet and dim, felt like a sanctuary, a place where past wounds could begin to be acknowledged and perhaps healed. Have you ever been forced into a conversation or situation you tried to avoid, but it ended up changing your perspective? Share your experience in the comments. The study felt almost sacred now, the penthouse chaos outside reduced to a distant murmur. Isabel gently settled the twins in a soft play area, letting them explore while she faced Jonathan. The tension in the room was quieter than before but heavier, loaded with years of unspoken words and old wounds. I should have said this a long time ago, Isabel began, her voice low but steady. Back then, when we were married, I wasn't barren. We just struggled. But you didn't wait. You left because you were impatient, proud, and scared. Jonathan flinched, a flash of guilt crossing his face. I thought it was hopeless. I thought we couldn't have a family together, he said, each word careful, measured. But it was too late, the truth was already woven into the fabric of their lives. Isabel's eyes softened but remained firm. I wanted children too. I wanted them more than anything. But I didn't tell you, because I was afraid. Afraid of losing you, afraid of disappointing you, afraid of being left again. And when you left, I thought I'd lost everything." Her voice broke slightly, the weight of years compressing into a single moment. Jonathan felt a sharp pang of regret, the memory of that night, her tears, her pleading, his own cold arrogance, burning into him. He had walked away, thinking he was protecting himself from disappointment. Instead, he had abandoned love, trust, and the very life he now saw thriving in the twins before him. "Then how?" he whispered, voice barely audible. "How did this happen? How, these children?" She hesitated, looking down at the twins, and a quiet pride softened her expression. "They are mine, Jonathan. Your children too, by circumstance, not by design. But I raised them alone. I loved them when I had nothing. And now, I brought them here to show you that life moves forward, even when people like us fail each other." The twins crawled closer, sensing the gravity of the conversation. Jonathan knelt instinctively, his hands shaking as he reached for them. They clung to him, innocent and trusting, and the emotional punch of their presence hit him with full force. He realized in that moment that they weren't just children, they were the embodiment of what he had lost, the living proof of the life he had abandoned. Isabel watched him, her expression a mix of compassion and firmness. "I survived, Jonathan. I thrived. And I'm not the same woman you walked away from. Neither are they. Neither are we. This is reality, and it's not going to bend for your pride." He closed his eyes, swallowing hard. Every memory came rushing back, the arguments, the nights filled with silence, the dreams they had shared and shattered. He had thought leaving her was an act of rational self-preservation. But now he knew it was nothing but cowardice, dressed in arrogance. I never realized," he admitted, voice raw. "I never realized how much I hurt you. How much I lost. I was blind, selfish, and," he stopped, unable to finish. Words seemed inadequate to express the tidal wave of regret and sorrow inside him. Isabel's hand reached out, just a touch on his arm. "It's not about punishment, Jonathan. It's about understanding. About seeing what's real and learning from it. That's the only way forward." Her words struck a chord deep within him. He thought about the lavish baby shower, the guests, the wealth, the appearances, all meaningless in comparison to this moment of truth. The facade he had built, the pride he had clung to, crumbled like sand through his fingers. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the soft coos of the twins filled the room, a quiet reminder of what mattered most. Jonathan finally looked up, his eyes meeting Isabel's. There was no anger there now, only a quiet expectation, a demand for honesty and change. "I don't know if I deserve a chance," he said quietly, "but I want to understand. I want to see what I've missed. What I could have been part of." Isabel's lips curved in the faintest acknowledgement. "Then start by listening. Not just tonight. Not just now. Really listening." The twins tugged gently at Isabel's sleeve, and she picked them up, holding them close. Jonathan watched, the image burning itself into his memory, two small lives, innocent and full of possibility, untouched by his pride, thriving in a world he had once rejected. He realized this was the reckoning he had avoided for years, the confrontation he had feared. And yet, it was the first step toward understanding, connection, and perhaps redemption. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of loss, the depth of regret, and the faintest spark of hope. The truth was raw, painful, and beautiful. Isabel had survived. She had flourished. And now, in this quiet room, he could finally begin to grasp what that meant, not just for her, but for him, and for the chance to rebuild what he had destroyed. The air in the study seemed to hum with possibility. Past mistakes had been unveiled, vulnerabilities exposed, and the raw truth of their lives laid bare. The story they had once shared had fractured, yes, but in the fragments lay the potential for something stronger, something honest, and something real. Jonathan finally exhaled, long and heavy, feeling a subtle shift in himself. He was no longer just a man confronted by his past, he was a man beginning to confront himself. Have you ever uncovered a truth about someone that completely changed how you saw them? Share your experience in the comments below. The study, once tense and quiet, now held a softer atmosphere. The twins, giggling as they played with a tower of colorful blocks, had unintentionally bridged the gap between Jonathan and Isabel. Their laughter was contagious, and for the first time in hours, the air seemed lighter. Jonathan, kneeling beside the twins, fumbled with a block, attempting to stack it just as one of the infants reached out and knocked it over. The child's delighted squeal pierced the silence, and he laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound he hadn't made in years. Isabel's eyes softened, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. "You're not as graceful as you look," she teased lightly, her tone carrying warmth instead of accusation. Jonathan started, but the twins grabbed his fingers, redirecting his attention. He tried to balance the blocks again, and again they tumbled. A shared laughter blossomed between him and Isabel, the first hint of camaraderie since this evening began. It was fragile, tentative, but unmistakable. "You always wanted control, didn't you?" Isabel asked gently, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. "Even with these little humans?" Jonathan swallowed, a sheepish grin forming. I guess I never thought I'd be humbled by two babies." His voice was soft, almost vulnerable, carrying the remnants of pride and the acknowledgement of his mistakes. Isabel shook her head, chuckling softly. "I told you, life has its own plans. It doesn't need your permission." The twins, oblivious to the weight of the conversation, crawled between them, tugging at Jonathan's sleeves. He bent down, letting them climb onto his lap, and Isabel gently brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. The touch was simple, yet it carried a profound, unspoken message: understanding, forgiveness, and cautious connection. For the first time, Jonathan allowed himself to speak openly about the years he had lost. I was blind, Isabel. I thought wealth and control could replace everything. I didn't see what truly mattered. I left you. I left all of this," he said, gesturing toward the twins. Isabel's eyes glistened, but she said nothing, letting his words hang in the air. The twins crawled onto her lap now, and she gently rested her head against Jonathan's shoulder. "It's not too late to start understanding," she murmured. The evening wore on, and the small study became a sanctuary. Jonathan and Isabel shared stories from the past, not the bitter ones filled with blame, but the lighter, human moments, the moments that reminded them of why they had once loved each other. They laughed softly at old inside jokes, stumbled over forgotten memories, and found themselves genuinely enjoying each other's company without the weight of expectation. Jonathan caught himself glancing at Isabel in a way he hadn't in years. Not with desire or arrogance, but with respect and admiration. She had grown stronger, more self-assured, and yet there was the same spark he had loved before, the spark that had made him fall for her in the first place. And Isabel, in turn, saw a different Jonathan, one stripped of ego, softened by humility, and willing to confront the pain he had caused. The walls she had built around her heart began to tremble, just enough to allow a tentative bond to form. As the night deepened, the twins grew tired. Isabel lifted them into her arms again, rocking them gently. Jonathan remained close, offering small gestures, adjusting blankets, holding tiny hands, sharing in quiet conversation. Each action was subtle, loaded with meaning, each moment a brick in the fragile bridge they were beginning to rebuild. "You've changed," Isabel said softly, almost a whisper. "But not too much." "That's good." Jonathan's lips curved into a small smile, the first one that felt fully unguarded. "I've realized what truly matters. Not control. Not wealth. Not appearances. You and them. This. Right here." Isabel's eyes softened, and she nodded. "Then maybe there's a chance, for all of us, to start again. Carefully. One step at a time." Jonathan nodded, feeling the weight of guilt ease slightly, replaced by a cautious hope. The night had begun with shock, humiliation, and resistance. But now, in this quiet corner, laughter, gentle touches, and shared vulnerability allowed a tentative healing to begin. For the first time since the evening started, they weren't adversaries. They were two people confronting the past, embracing the present, and imagining a future where trust, connection, and love could flourish again. The twins yawned, curling into Isabel's arms. Jonathan leaned closer, resting a hand on her back, careful, respectful, and aware of the delicate balance forming between them. The bond, fragile as it was, carried the promise of something deeper, a reconciliation that would not be rushed, but would be genuine, lasting, and transformative. Have you ever found a moment of connection in the middle of conflict or tension? Share your story in the comments below. The calm of the study was shattered by the sudden ringing of Jonathan's phone. He hesitated, the screen flashing Vanessa's name. The laughter and warmth from moments ago evaporated instantly. Isabel noticed the shift immediately, his jaw tightening, his hand trembling slightly as he swiped to answer. "Jonathan? Everything okay?" Isabel asked cautiously, holding the twins a little closer, her voice tinged with unease. "It's Vanessa," he muttered, voice tight. "She wants to know why I disappeared. Tonight. With you." Isabel's eyes narrowed, a flicker of anger surfacing. She had allowed hope, connection, and healing to bloom in the fragile space they shared, but the outside world threatened to undo it all. Jonathan ended the call abruptly, muttering apologies. She's worried about appearances. About people seeing me here with you, with them." Isabel's lips pressed into a thin line. "Appearances? After everything, you're letting appearances dictate your actions?" Her voice rose, sharp with betrayal. "After all the pain, humiliation, and truth tonight, you let her dictate how you behave?" Jonathan's expression hardened, defensive yet conflicted. "Isabel, it's complicated. She's part of my life. You think she matters more than me? More than your children?" The words cut deep. The twins looked between them, sensing tension rising again, their innocent chatter forgotten. "I didn't mean," Jonathan started, but she interrupted, voice cracking. "Didn't mean? Jonathan, do you even understand what tonight meant? What I went through to stand here, to show you, to face you? And now you're letting her shadow everything?" Jonathan's pride flared. "Isabel, I'm trying to manage this." You're not trying," she snapped. Her hands shook slightly, and for a moment, the woman who had stood so calm and composed just minutes ago looked vulnerable, raw, and human. "You're controlling. Just like before. You don't want reconciliation, you want to control how I feel, how these children exist, how I live. You invited me here for spectacle, and now you're letting it crumble under your pride." The room was thick with tension. The twins whimpered, sensing the emotional storm. Jonathan's chest tightened. He wanted to reach out, to explain, to fix, but the words lodged in his throat, heavy with shame and fear. I don't know how to fix this," he admitted quietly, the vulnerability breaking through his defenses. "I never wanted to hurt you. I'm afraid of losing control. I thought I could manage everything." Isabel shook her head, tears welling. "Control. You always need control. But tonight was never about control. It was about truth, Jonathan. And you can't see it. Not fully." A silence fell, deafening and suffocating. The twins, now whimpering, crawled toward Isabel instinctively. She gathered them into her arms, retreating slightly, her heart heavy with disappointment and hurt. Jonathan finally sat heavily, burying his face in his hands. The weight of failure pressed down on him. He had come so far, seen truths, acknowledged mistakes, glimpsed hope, and yet he had shattered it all with a single call, a single moment of weakness. Pride and fear had sabotaged the fragile trust he had just begun to rebuild. Isabel's voice, quiet now, was filled with a sorrow that pierced him deeper than any anger could. "I tried, Jonathan. I tried to let us heal. But you're still the man who left me once. Maybe you can't change. Maybe this was never meant to be. Jonathan lifted his head slowly, eyes filled with regret and longing. Isabel. But she turned away, cradling the twins, stepping toward the study door. Her departure felt like a physical blow. The air seemed to thicken, heavy with all that remained unsaid, all the love he feared he had lost, all the hope slipping through his fingers. Alone now, Jonathan sank into a chair, staring at the empty space she had occupied. The room, once warm with laughter and tentative connection, now felt cold and hollow. He realized fully that he had reached the lowest point he could, the moment where pride, fear, and old patterns had torn apart the fragile bond that had begun to form. The shattered point wasn't just about her leaving the room. It was about the realization that despite truth, evidence, and undeniable love, he could still destroy what mattered most through hesitation, ego, and the inability to fully surrender. He ran a hand over his face, swallowing hard. The twins' laughter, once a source of warmth, now echoed in memory, a painful reminder of the joy he had risked losing forever. And in that silence, Jonathan understood the cost. Tonight, he had glimpsed what real love could be, and he had almost let it slip away entirely. Have you ever sabotaged a relationship or moment of trust out of pride or fear? How did you recover? Share your thoughts in the comments. The city skyline glittered beyond the penthouse windows, a cold contrast to the storm that raged inside Jonathan. He sat alone in the dimly lit study, the weight of failure pressing down on him. The echoes of Isabel's departure still lingered, mingling with the soft coos of the twins from another room. The quiet wasn't comforting, it was a mirror reflecting every mistake, every hesitation, every ounce of pride that had sabotaged the fragile bond they were building. Jonathan closed his eyes, running his hands over his face. The truth was undeniable, he loved her. Not the memory, not the idea, but the woman who had survived his abandonment, raised children alone, and yet still held space for him to be part of their lives. And he realized something else: if he didn't act now, if he let pride dictate his choices, he might lose them forever. Meanwhile, Isabel sat quietly in her bedroom, the twins asleep in their cribs nearby. She replayed the evening in her mind, weighing every word, every glance, every gesture. Part of her wanted to retreat entirely, to guard herself and her children from the heartbreak of someone who had hurt them before. But another part, the part that still remembered the man beneath the arrogance, the man who had loved her once, urged her to reconsider. Could he truly change? Could trust be rebuilt after all the years? Jonathan rose slowly, pacing the room. The penthouse felt too large, too empty. He picked up his phone, stared at her number, and hesitated. Pride whispered that she would reject him, that he didn't deserve forgiveness. But a deeper, rawer voice, the voice of regret, love, and hope, urged him to speak. He typed a message, deleted it, rewrote, deleted again. Each word felt insufficient, but he knew he had to try. Finally, he sent a simple text. I can't undo the past, but I want to try. Can we talk? For us, and for them. Isabel's phone buzzed, and she hesitated before opening it. Reading the words, a storm of emotions hit her: anger, longing, caution, and hope. The simple message carried vulnerability he had never shown before, an admission of fear and love that bypassed all pride. She stared at it, her thumb hovering over reply. Finally, she typed, "Meet me in the study. Alone. I need to see if your words mean anything." Jonathan's chest tightened as he read her reply. The study, where their fragile bond had begun and shattered, would now become the arena of truth. He made his way there, heart hammering, aware that this was the moment of reckoning. Isabel was already there, holding the twins' toys but keeping a careful distance. The room smelled faintly of vanilla from the candles earlier, an intimate, almost nostalgic aroma that reminded him of shared pasts. Neither spoke immediately, letting silence stretch long enough to feel both the tension and the anticipation. Jonathan exhaled, finally breaking the quiet. I was wrong. Tonight, my pride, my fear. I almost destroyed everything. I can't bear the thought of losing you, of losing them. I want to try, really try, to make this right. If you'll let me. Isabel studied him, searching for any trace of manipulation or charm. She saw none. Only vulnerability, honesty, and longing. She took a step closer, her heart tentative but open. Do you understand what it means to be part of their lives? To be responsible, to love without reservation, without control? Yes, he said firmly, voice steady now. I do. And I will. I promise. I can't change the past, but I can choose every day to be here, fully, for all of you. Tears welled in Isabel's eyes. She had waited for years to hear those words not of apology alone, but of commitment, of understanding, of true transformation. She took another step closer, and this time, they were close enough to bridge the years of pain between them. Then, she said softly, let's start again. Carefully, but genuinely. And if you falter, I will protect them. But I hope you won't falter. Jonathan reached out, gently taking her hand. I won't. Not again. Not ever. The twins stirred slightly, and Isabel lifted them into her arms. Jonathan knelt beside them, carefully placing a hand on each small back. Their tiny fingers wrapped around his, and he felt an emotional weight lift slightly, the first tangible sense of redemption he had experienced in years. In that moment, they made a silent choice together, to move forward, not to erase the past, but to embrace it, learn from it, and allow love to guide them. It was tentative, fragile, and yet powerful, a choice that would define the rest of their lives. The night stretched on, but the storm had passed. The study, once a space of tension, humiliation, and heartbreak, now held the possibility of healing, connection, and a future shaped by understanding, care, and deliberate choices. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose vulnerability over pride? How did that choice change your life? Share in the comments below. The early morning light filtered through the penthouse windows, casting a warm, golden glow across the room. The city outside had begun to stir, but inside, time seemed to move more slowly, as if acknowledging the quiet triumph that had been achieved. Jonathan sat on the sofa, the twins perched contentedly on either side of him, their tiny hands grasping his fingers. Isabel knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from one child's forehead. Their eyes met, and the unspoken words of regret, forgiveness, love, and hope passed between them effortlessly. The events of the previous night, the storm of pride, fear, and misunderstanding, now felt like a distant memory. What remained was the tangible evidence of truth, Isabel's unwavering strength, the twins' innocence, and the realization that love, unexpected, complicated, and sometimes painful, could still flourish. Jonathan exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of years lift from his chest. I never realized how much I needed this, he said quietly. Not just them, not just you, but this. This chance to be better, to be present. Isabel's eyes glistened with a mixture of relief and warmth. We all needed it, Jonathan. But it's not just about today, it's about every day after this. Choices matter. Love requires courage. And trust must be earned. He nodded solemnly. I understand. And I'll earn it. Every day. For a long moment, they simply sat together, the twins giggling as they played with blocks and soft toys, oblivious to the weight of the reconciliation taking place around them. Jonathan reached out, gently holding Isabel's hand, their fingers intertwining naturally, effortlessly. It was a simple gesture, but in it lay the promise of a future rebuilt. As the morning light bathed the room, Jonathan reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The humiliation he had planned, the confrontation he had orchestrated, the resistance, the revelations, the fragile bonding, the shattering moment, and the ultimate choice, all of it had led to this, a realignment of hearts, a rekindling of trust, and the undeniable presence of love where it had once been lost. Isabel leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steadiness in his embrace. You've changed, she said softly, though her tone carried admiration rather than accusation. Jonathan smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. I've learned, he replied. And I promise to keep learning. Not just for me, but for us, and for them. The twins, sensing the emotional calm around them, crawled onto Jonathan's lap. He laughed softly as they tugged at his sleeves, their innocence a reminder of what truly mattered. Isabel watched, a sense of contentment settling over her like a warm blanket. Jonathan caught her gaze, a playful spark returning to his eyes. "You know," he said, "I think I could get used to this, being a dad, being part of a family again. Not perfect, but real." Isabel smiled, the tension of the past months dissolving into laughter and relief. "Real is good," she said. "Real is everything." They shared a quiet moment, the kind that doesn't need words to express itself. In the distance, the city hummed to life, but here, in this small universe of soft light, playful children, and two adults willing to embrace love and vulnerability, the world was right again. Jonathan turned his attention fully to Isabel, kneeling slightly beside her. "I know it won't always be easy. There will be challenges. But I want to face them with you. I don't want to make the same mistakes again. I want to be here, fully, genuinely, and without reservation." Tears glistened in her eyes, but this time they were tears of relief and hope, not sorrow. "Then we'll face them together," she said. "Every challenge, every joy, every moment." The twins giggled, tugging at both of them simultaneously, their small hands bridging the space between their parents. Jonathan and Isabel shared a look, a mixture of love, pride, and shared purpose. It was more than reconciliation, it was transformation. The fractured past had been acknowledged, the mistakes had been faced, and the path forward was paved with understanding, courage, and undeniable connection. Jonathan gently lifted the twins, holding them both close. Isabel mirrored him, her hands brushing his back as they shared a quiet, intimate family moment. The tension, fear, and pride that had once loomed over them had been replaced with laughter, tenderness, and the first real sense of permanence in years. "This," Jonathan whispered, holding the twins securely, "is what I should have fought for all along. Not appearances, not power, not revenge, this." Isabel nodded, resting her head against his shoulder. "And now you know," she said softly. "And now we move forward. Together." The morning stretched, soft and warm, filled with small, ordinary moments, tiny hands reaching, laughter, quiet smiles, but it was extraordinary because it was real. They had survived pride, humiliation, fear, and misunderstanding, and had emerged on the other side stronger, closer, and infinitely more connected. In that moment, Jonathan understood that love at last wasn't just a story. It was a choice, a daily commitment, a willingness to be vulnerable, to admit mistakes, and to embrace the unexpected. And as he held Isabel and the twins close, he knew this was only the beginning of a new chapter, one written with humility, trust, and a love that had endured, survived, and finally thrived.